I've worked behind this bar for 17 years, and I've seen my share of strange nights. Fights that started over nothing. Men swearing they'd seen ghosts in the alley. One guy who sat in the corner talking to someone who wasn't there. But nothing ever stuck with me quite like the night Ronan stepped outside and never came back. It was St. Patrick's Day, and the pub was alive in a way that made the walls feel too tight. The floor was sticky with spilled Guinness, the air thick with whiskey breath, damp wool, and the burnt oil smell of fried chips. The old wooden beams trembled under the weight of footfalls and fiddle music, the sound spilling out into the rain-soaked streets. The pub had been here for centuries, before electricity, before cobblestones, before laws about closing time. Some of the regulars swore it was built on old ground, that the walls had soaked in more than just stories. I never believed in all that, but maybe I should have. Ronan had his usual seat at the bar, near the end where the wood was worn smooth from his elbows. A big man, broad and steady, but with a softness in his face that made him easy to like. He paid in exact change, always lined up neatly on the counter. Told the same 3 jokes every night he drank. Had a scar across his jaw he never explained. He lifted his pint, gave me a small nod. "Good crowd tonight?" I grunted in agreement, pouring a whiskey for a man at the other end of the bar. When I looked back, Ronan was patting his pockets, frowning. "Stepping out for a smoke," he muttered. Nothing strange about that, except he left his coat, and his drink, 3/4 full, still sweating against the wood. The door swung shut behind him, and that was it. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Someone finally asked, "Where's Ronan?" I glanced at the door, then at his untouched pint. That's when I felt it, like the room had been holding its breath, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones before you even realize it's there. I grabbed a rag, wiped the counter. A nervous habit. My eyes drifted to the far end of the bar. He was still there. The man who'd been sitting alone all night, nursing the same glass. He wasn't watching the game. He wasn't listening to the music. He was watching the door and smiling. A slow, patient kind of smile. His clothes were dry, perfectly dry. Not a drop of rain on them, even though everyone else had come in soaked. And he never blinked. Not once. "Friend of yours?" I asked, nodding toward Ronan's seat. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was weighing the words before he spoke. His fingers tapped absently against the side of his glass, but it didn't leave a ring on the counter. It should have. "Still smiling," he said. "Not anymore." A memory stirred. A few years back, Ronan had gotten into a shouting match with someone outside the pub. I hadn't seen the man's face, just the way Ronan had grabbed his wrist, voice low and urgent before shoving him away. That night, Ronan had come back inside pale as a ghost, knocking back his whiskey in one long swallow. I looked at the smiling man again, and something in my stomach turned to ice. The next morning, when the sun came up and the rain had washed the streets clean, there was no sign of Ronan. Not a single footprint, not a dropped cigarette. Like he'd stepped outside and the night had swallowed him whole. I didn't say anything at first. People come and go. Maybe he'd wandered home, found his way to bed. But when his sister came in the next evening, her face tight with worry, I knew it wasn't that simple. "He didn't come home," she said, gripping her coat like she was holding herself together. "No one's seen him. He wouldn't just leave." I nodded, but I didn't know what to tell her. The pub was the last place he'd been, and I hadn't heard a damn thing since he walked out that door. Except the glass, the one the smiling man had touched. It was still there, still half full. But when I picked it up, my fingers stung from the cold. The kind of cold that shouldn't have been possible, not after sitting out all night. A thin sheen of frost clung to the rim. My breath curled white in the air. The hairs on my arms stood up. A week passed, then 2. Ronan never came home, but he wasn't the only one. First it was Jimmy, the old man who always sat by the fireplace. Then Maeve, the waitress who worked weekends. They just stopped coming in. No goodbyes, no trace, and the pub felt emptier for it. People still drank, still sang, but no one lingered past closing. No one took Ronan's seat, even when the place was packed. And sometimes, when the night stretched long and the wind howled down the street, the door creaked open on its own. Just a crack. Just enough to make me look. One night, just before closing, I found a cigarette in the doorway. Dry as bone, like it had never seen rain. I shouldn't have picked it up. I know that now. But I did. It was warm between my fingers. The door creaked. A gust of cold air slipped in. And somewhere in the dark, just beyond the glow of the street lamp, I swore I heard a voice. Low, familiar. "Got a light?" My hand moved to the door handle. My fingers wrapped around the brass. I almost turned it. Almost stepped outside. Then I saw them. Not just one silhouette in the rain. 3, maybe more. Standing too still. Watching. Waiting. I let go of the handle. Slowly. I didn't answer. I just locked the door. Every year, the coin changed hands. No speeches, no fuss, just a quiet transfer during St. Patrick's Day dinner. A family tradition so old that no one really questioned it. The gold coin, worn smooth by time, passed from one family member to the next, and that was that. Until this year. My name is Aidan Callahan, and I never thought much about the coin. It was just a thing we did, like carving pumpkins on Halloween or leaving cookies out for Santa. I was 26, the youngest of 3 siblings, back home after a rough patch. Dead-end job, bad breakup, the usual mess. I told myself I had bigger things to worry about. I was wrong. We were all seated around my grandmother's dining table, the same one she'd had since before I was born. The room smelled like lamb stew, soda bread, and the faint, musty scent of something long soaked into the walls. The usual small talk filled the space. Who was moving? Who was having another kid? Whose job was going well or not? Then Uncle Seamus cleared his throat. Silence fell over the table, the way it always did when it was time for the coin. He reached into his pocket, his knuckles pale as he pulled it out. A small golden disc, gleaming even in the dim light. But instead of offering it to my cousin Fiona, whose turn was next, He set it down on the table between us. "I'm not passing it this year," he said, his voice flat. The scrape of utensils against plates stopped. A weighted pause. "Seamus," my mother said slowly, "we all pass it on. That's what we do." He shook his head, staring at the coin like it had grown teeth. "Not this time. Not after last year." A strange, cold ripple passed through me. I glanced around the table, confusion, a few nervous glances, my grandmother pressing her lips together. But no one asked what he meant. No one wanted to ask. Fiona shifted in her seat. "Uncle, come on." "No." His voice cracked. "If you knew what I saw." He stopped, swallowing hard. He pushed the coin farther away from him, as if just touching it had drained him. "I won't be the reason this happens again." "What happens again?" I asked. No one looked at me. Grandma sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose like she had a headache. "We'll talk about it later." But we didn't. Dinner continued, though the food tasted off, the warmth of the room dulled by something else, something no one wanted to acknowledge. The coin sat untouched between us. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. Seamus's voice echoed in my head. "If you knew what I saw." I found myself wandering down the hall, toward the old bookshelf in the sitting room. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Some kind of explanation, maybe. Some clue about why he had broken the tradition. But instead, I found something else. Tucked between two old recipe books was a thin, yellowed envelope. My great-grandfather's handwriting scrawled across the front. I pulled it out, heart thudding, and unfolded the brittle paper inside. The words were simple, blunt, and terrifying. The coin must never be kept. It must move on. If it stays, it calls them back. I read the note 3 times before my brain let the words settle. Calls them back. Who? Or what? A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. "You shouldn't be looking at that." Grandma's voice was barely above a whisper. I turned slowly. She stood in the doorway, her nightgown loose around her thin frame, her face half swallowed by shadows. "What does it mean?" I asked, holding the paper up. She exhaled through her nose. "It means your uncle is a fool, and now we all have to pay for it." A chill slipped down my back. "Who's coming?" Grandma hesitated. Something flickered across her face. Anger, fear, guilt. "We don't say their names," she whispered. "Not ever." I waited for more, but she just turned, walking back toward her bedroom, her steps impossibly quiet. The house had changed. I felt it, something stretching awake, like a held breath being released. The warmth of the evening was gone, replaced by something hollow, something waiting. And then, somewhere in the dark, I heard it. A knock. Not at the door, not at a window. From inside the house. The darkness wasn't empty. The air thickened, pressing against my skin like unseen eyes were crawling over me. A sound, like dry leaves scraping together, filled the silence. Then movement, shadows shifting, peeling away from the walls, taking form. Figures stood there now, tall and thin, their limbs stretched just too long, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. Their faces were smooth, almost human but not quite, and they were staring at the coin. Seamus let out a strangled sob. "They want it back," he gasped. Grandma grabbed my wrist, her grip tight, desperate. "It must be passed on, Aiden," she hissed. "It was never about luck. It was a bargain. A deal struck long ago. We give the coin and they leave us be. But if it stays..." The things took a step closer. The air shook with something soundless, something that made my teeth ache. "Run," Grandma whispered. I lunged for the coin, but the moment my fingers touched it, the figures surged forward. Hands, too many hands, grasped at me cold as grave dirt. My vision blurred. My skin burned. "Pass it on," Grandma screamed. I turned blindly, shoving the coin into Seamus's trembling hands. He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. A wail, high and hollow, filled the house. The figures convulsed, their forms unraveling into shadow. The walls groaned, the air sucked inward, and then, just like that, they were gone. Seamus collapsed to the floor, the coin clutched in his palm. Grandma sagged against the wall. "It's his again," she murmured. "Until next year." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. My skin still burned where they had touched me. I wanted to believe it was over, but I knew better. 3 nights later, I woke to a familiar sound. A knock. Software rhythmic. And this time, Seamus wasn't answering. The party was already too loud when I got there. Too many people crammed into a house that was probably meant to hold half this number. Green streamers, flashing lights, the air thick with cheap beer and something sickly sweet. Maybe the Jell-O shots. I almost didn't come, but Liam had insisted, said it would be good for me, said I couldn't keep isolating myself, avoiding places where people drank. If you're really done with it, being around it shouldn't matter, right? Easy for him to say. He was the kind of guy who could party all night and wake up with a clear head, who never let things get out of control. The kind of guy people gravitated toward. We'd met in orientation, and he'd taken me under his wing fast, like he could sense I needed someone to anchor me. "Come on, man. Just one party," he'd said. "No pressure, no weird vibes. I've got you." That was the problem. I trusted him. And I was starting to wonder if that was a mistake. I spotted him near the kitchen, handing out drinks like a king among his court. Everyone gravitated toward him. His laugh was just the right kind of loud, his presence magnetic. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Dude, you actually came. Here." He pressed a plastic cup into my hand before I could say anything. The liquid inside glowed faintly under the neon lights, an artificial green. "You have to try this. It's tradition." I frowned. "What tradition?" Liam grinned, tilting his own cup toward me. "It's called Lear's Gift, some old Irish thing, supposed to make the night last forever." "Forever?" Forced a chuckle. "Sounds like a bad hangover." "Nah, man, it's legendary. You drink, you have the best night of your life. You wake up feeling brand new. No one knows who started it. It just shows up at certain parties, but only once a year." I hesitated. "Who brought it?" His smile didn't waver, but there was something else behind his eyes, something unreadable. "Who cares?" It's free booze. Everyone's drinking it. I shouldn't have. Not after everything. But people were watching. And Liam had been good to me. He'd talked me down on bad nights. Reminded me I was stronger than my past. If he said this was safe, maybe it was. So I took a sip. It was cold. Too cold, like it had been poured straight from a glacier. The taste was impossible. Sweet and burning, metallic and smooth. It coated my tongue, the roof of my mouth sinking deep like something alive. My fingertips tingled. Liam watched me waiting. Good, right? I nodded, forced a smile, took another sip. The taste lingered in a way that felt wrong. Then the room shifted. Not physically. The walls didn't move, the floor didn't tilt, but suddenly everything was off. Conversations blurred together, voices overlapping in ways that didn't make sense. The music stuttered, like a bad signal. I turned my head, and it felt like the movement took a fraction of a second too long to register, like my body and brain were slightly out of sync. Hey, you okay? Liam's voice, closer than before. Had he moved? Had I moved? I didn't remember stepping forward, but I was closer to the kitchen now. I looked at my cup. It was full again. What? I swallowed. My mouth felt dry. Did you refill this? Liam laughed, but it sounded distant. Nah, man. You must have grabbed another. Happens. I knew I hadn't, but my hand was still wrapped around the cup, fingers damp with condensation. The green liquid shimmered under the lights. People were still laughing, dancing, shouting. The party raged on like nothing was wrong. Maybe nothing was wrong. Maybe I was just drunk already. Maybe... I turned to leave the kitchen, to find some air, some clarity. But as I did, I saw Liam handing another cup to someone else. And for just a second, his smile faltered. Just for a second, he looked at them the way he had looked at me, like he was waiting for something. I woke up with my mouth tasting like copper and my head full of static. I wasn't in my bed. Blinking against the light, I pushed myself up. The room was unfamiliar, someone's couch, a blanket haphazardly thrown over me. My phone sat on the coffee table. The battery was almost dead. I didn't remember leaving the party. A low murmur came from the next room. Laughter, but off, stilted. I pushed myself up, legs unsteady, and caught my reflection in the dark TV screen. My eyes were too bright, the whites too sharp, my pupils too large. I stepped into the hallway. The air felt thick, like stepping underwater. Two people sat on the floor, whispering, their movements just a little too fluid, like their limbs didn't fully belong to them. Did you hear it? One of them murmured. The voice. I turned, heart hammering. A girl sat slumped against the wall, eyes half-lidded, mouth slightly open. Her wrist shimmered green. She looked at me and something in her gaze hollowed me out. It's still inside us, she said. It grows in us. My breath hitched. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Liam. I pressed play. At first, nothing. Just a crackle of static. Then, breathing, slow, measured. Then a wet, choking sound. Laughter, maybe? Something that used to be laughter? Then a voice. Soft. Too close to the mic. See you next year. My skin prickled. I turned, and in the dim hallway mirror, I saw something move beneath the surface of my skin. Something small, something shifting. I gasped, scrambled backward. My pulse pounded in my ears, and then I heard Liam's voice. Right behind me. "You get used to it." I turned, but he was already walking away, fading into the morning light, and my cup had never been empty. I don't remember last night. That's not unusual after a St. Patrick's Eve bender. But this feels different. My head isn't just pounding. It feels heavy, like something's pressing on the inside of my skull. My mouth tastes like metal. My phone is dead, and there's a smear of something green on my wrist that won't wash off. My name is Niall Keane, 28th, freelance photographer. It's been a rough year. Work dried up, my friends drifted, and I've been drinking too much, filling the gaps with whiskey and static. Maybe that's why I was vulnerable, why I followed strangers into the dark last night. I should have stayed in bed, let the lost hours stay lost. But I go to the parade anyway. Maybe I'm hoping for a memory to shake loose. Maybe I just don't want to be alone with this wrongness crawling under my skin. The streets are packed. Green hats, painted faces, the scent of spilled beer and fried food clogging the cold air. The parade moves slow, a river of bodies pressing together, too close, too loud. A marching band blares something festive, but the rhythm feels uneven, like a wheel that isn't turning quite right. No one else seems to notice. Then I see him. A street performer, perched on stilts, towering above the crowd. His suit is shimmering green and gold, sharp lapelled and too crisp, like something out of another century. His face is painted white, but the smile drawn over his lips is too wide, too sharp. He's not juggling or making balloon animals. He's just standing there, watching me. I turn too fast, nearly crash into a woman balancing 3 beers in one hand. When I look back, he's gone. I tell myself it's just paranoia. Too much alcohol, not enough sleep. The parade moves on, floats roll past, kids cheer, confetti drifts in the wind. And then, there he is again. This time he's closer. No stilts. Just standing in the crowd like he belongs there. Green and gold suit gleaming under the overcast sky. And he's still watching. I push forward, shoving past a group taking selfies. The air is thick, humid despite the chill. My hands are shaking. I don't know why. Someone grabs my wrist. I flinch hard, spin around. But it's just Finn, my only real friend left in this city. He looks concerned. "Jesus, Niall, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I open my mouth, but something stops me. The taste of metal gets stronger. Finn's still holding my wrist, his eyes widening at the green smear. "Mate, what the hell is that?" I don't know, but the performer is still there, and he's smiling. The music is wrong. The world feels like it's shifting under my feet, stretching and pulling like wet fabric. Finn's talking, but I barely hear him. I push deeper into the crowd, shoving past people in green hats and cheap plastic beads. The air is thick with sweat and beer, and the smell makes me gag. I need to get away from him, from it. But the performer doesn't follow. Not exactly. He appears. One moment he's nowhere. The next he's a few feet ahead. standing in the throng of bodies like he's always been there, waiting. And he's getting closer. I turn down a side street, heart hammering, my phone still dead. I should go home, but I don't know if home will even be safe. I don't know if anywhere will be. Something flickers at the edge of my vision. A movement, too quick, too fluid. The performer is there, standing at the end of the alley, smiling. Finn is still behind me. Niall, talk to me. You're scaring me, man. The performer tilts his head. Because you asked me to. I shake my head. I don't remember. His smile stretches wider. Exactly. A memory slams into me, hard and sudden. Laughter, a dark room, a circle of people in green and gold masks, someone whispering my name, a voice saying, "Drink this, and you'll never be alone again." And Finn was there. I stagger back, dizzy. The buildings seem to pulse, as though breathing in tandem with the music. The parade is distant now, but the rhythm still echoes through my ribs. "You knew," I whisper. Finn won't meet my eyes. "I tried to stop you." The performer steps forward, and the air thickens, pressing down like deep water. The crowd is gone. It's just him and me now. "You don't get to leave," he says, almost gently. "You joined us." The memories come faster now. Flashes of faces, a candlelit room, the scent of something burning. My own voice laughing. A promise I don't remember making. And I understand. The green mark on my wrist isn't just a stain. It's a brand. A sigil tied to an ancient pact. The same shade that once marked the doorways of those chosen in older times, before the snakes were driven out, before the old gods were buried beneath a saint's name. Finn steps back, his face pale. "You still have a choice," he whispers, "but not for long." The performer extends a hand, waiting. The music reaches its crescendo. I look at Finn, at the man who isn't a man at all, and I make my decision. I take the performer's hand, and the world bends inward. The buildings collapse into shifting shadows, the sky unspooling into ribbons of deep green. My skin burns, but not from heat. Something is rewriting me, threading me into the song. I see it all now. The Green Man was never a man. He was a harbinger, a keeper of an old debt, a spirit bound to this night, the lost ones who stumble too close. The parade isn't a celebration. It's a ritual, a tribute to something older than the holiday wrapped around it. Finn shouts my name, but his voice is lost beneath the music. I feel his grip on my arm for one last second, his desperation cutting through the haze, and then I let go. The pain is quick, sharp, like stepping into cold water, but then it's gone. I stretch taller, my body shifts, reshapes, warps into something no longer human. My limbs lengthen, my suit gleams green and gold, sharp and precise as the masks from my memory. Below me, someone stares up, confusion in their eyes. They are next. The cycle begins again.